Somehow, my daughters fell in love with Formula One. I don't know how or why, but I'm not arguing. They may not know wheel, but does anyone?
Hello and welcome to We Don't Know Wheel. I'm Anne.
And I'm Grace. We're two sisters who are spending all our time talking about Formula One. So we thought, why don't we make a podcast and make our family and friends listen to us talk about Formula One?
Instead of our sister just making fun of us for how much we talk about it.
Welcome.
So, we just had a race in Mexico. I always love when they race in Mexico because I'm a huge Checo fan, and just like seeing the way the crowd just adores him. And like, I feel like every single video, if Checo is in the video from Mexico, you can hear the crowd chanting his name, and it's awesome. What did you think?
Yes. I think it's the fans are rad. It's fun to see so many people so engaged. Obviously like Formula One is a a deal in Mexico, so that's awesome. And that's always fun to see. Um
I
I
do
do
think,
feel like I've seen some stuff with the drivers just saying that like there was maybe a little bit too much intensity.
yeah, I saw that too.
And yeah, I thought that was I think totally valid. I have to say honestly, even watching like videos of the drivers in the paddock, not just this week, honestly, like at Austin and other places as well, it just seems so overwhelming. And it's interesting. I feel like the drivers are already like hyper accessible compared to a lot of other sports. Like you can't just buy a pass to the locker room when you go to an American football game. But somehow like you can buy a pass that basically gives you access to meet like the drivers and the team principals, and which is really cool. But it seems like as F1 currently stands in especially the you in the Americas, like it's I don't know, it's a little rough. I saw that Lando Norris had made a comment where he was saying like we like to meet the fans and we're not against that, but maybe they just need to sign something saying that they're going to be respectful and that they will have to be kicked out if they aren't. And I think that's super fair. Honestly, I'm a weirdo who's like, I don't even like the concept of signing things. So I'm like, no more signing. I just don't get it. It's not for me. I'm like, get rid of the signing, but I think I'm alone in that. So I'm like, it's crazy that they're like high performance athletes who are also asked to do like a wild amount of PR every time they're going into a race weekend, and like before and after all of these like qualifying sessions and free practices. And like I don't know, that would like it seems so stressful. I don't get it. What
Yeah,
do you think, Anne?
I agree with all of that. And I think that it is super cool how much access we as fans have to the drivers. And I think that's part of the fun
Yeah, it's definitely
of
like part of
like
why it's so
getting to,
enjoyable.
yes, where like you feel like you get to know the drivers in different ways. But I agree that like it seemed frantic in the paddock in terms of like just the drivers being able to walk around and get to where they're supposed to get to and like feel safe. Which, and
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like it would be that difficult to set up like, okay, we're gonna have some sort of like small divider. This is the areas where the drivers and their teams are going to be, and the fans are not allowed to pass this line to give them a little bit of space.
Well, and I
Or
think Pierre also
Lando's
made a
idea.
statement. I think Pierre said like that there were people who were not like authorized to be in the AlphaTauri garage all weekend. And
That's crazy.
that seems wild. Yeah. And so like I do think that there needs to be some better system than
Yeah.
what's I don't know. It's
I,
cool that you can buy paddock passes, but also like part of me is like, oh, I mean, Formula One's all about money, so I don't know why I'm being a grump about this, but I'm like, that's not very accessible of you to the
yeah.
people. What about the people?
Yeah. It would be interesting to know how it's different at different venues Because I'm sure that there must be some sort of difference in terms of like how many people are allowed in different areas and also how the fans treat the drivers. And I would guess that Mexico is probably on the wilder side.
Although I would be
Um,
careful about saying that because isn't Silverstone known for being like really rowdy? And
oh,
so
I'm
is
sure it is
like
too. And Zandvoort.
Zandvoort, super rowdy. So
Yeah,
it's like, you know, there's rowdy fans everywhere.
absolutely.
It's more to me, it's like, yeah, it's like, yeah, do I like I think that our podcast is us talking a lot about like the access content that we're getting, right? Like
True.
I was gonna say, like as a fan, you love today Lando Norris posted a picture and he was like, what you guys really want or something on his Instagram. And it was just him and Carlos just
So
hanging
cute.
out,
It's
which
great
is so
picture, by the
cute.
way.
And you're like, yeah, that is what the fans want. But you're like, there must be a way that we can share that without making them feel like unsafe or like,
Yes.
yeah, that's
Agreed.
probably the big
Yeah.
thing.
Which I didn't even notice throughout the week that with Checo in Mexico, obviously he's gonna be like everybody wants to see him there. And it almost felt like Red Bull kind of set it up in a way where he would be around people would get to see him all the time, but he's always kind of separated from the crowd, which I'm sure was necessary and smart for them to do to make sure that he was
Yeah.
not constantly surrounded by a mob where it was just impossible for him to walk.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that's the thing is like the drivers need like they need like security to walk around the paddock. And that seems like nuts because like that's their place of employment. That's where they're working.
Yeah.
They need to the drivers union needs to lay down the law. But
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's why I saw a video of like Carlos walking into the Ferrari like trailers, garage, yeah.
Like where the
Ferrari
car is and where
hospitality,
the
I
car
think.
comes
It was
out? Or, oh, the
hospitality.
hospitality. Okay.
And, you know, there was this huge crowd of people around him. And he has like his team kind of like making it so he can make his way through the crowd. And this girl got like pushed over by the crowd and fell backwards. And like he helped her up very kindly. But then, of course, everyone in the comments is like, I know what I'm doing next year. And you're like,
I saw that too.
guys. But I mean,
Like,
yeah, it's a funny joke. It's a
yes.
hopefully if, in the context of a joke, funny. In the context of reality, I'm like, that seems like it sucks. Because also I think when you're looking, and maybe it's also we're getting this interesting juxtaposition of like coming out of the pandemic where there were no fans. And so the drivers were just like, just doing a little quick trip trap down the lane, got to run off to free practice one or whatever. And now it's like back to pre-pandemic.
And probably crazier
and even
than
busier
pre-pandemic because Drive to Survive has made so many new fans of the sport. And so like almost every venue this year has had like record crowds, which is crazy and super fun. But also there needs to be some sort of a balance for the drivers for them to be able to do their job. And if you think about a soccer game, they're not going out and walking amongst a crowd right before they play. They're in a locker room. They're separate.
And it is also like, I do want to say, like, you know, there have been times in history where Formula One has been incredibly popular. And like, you can see videos of Michael Schumacher getting like mauled by the crowd and stuff. But it is interesting in the context of like COVID and Drive to Survive because Formula One was really in this like downturn of attendance right before Drive to Survive started. And then you add in the pandemic. So you had this like kind of, it was like on a downturn, boom, like the most popular it's ever been. These drivers are getting exposed to like the most insanity they've ever experienced. So I don't know. It definitely seems like something should change. It's cool that they're accessible, but like maybe within some limits would be better.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, it must be interesting to be one of the drivers that has been around in Formula One for more than like 8 years because they've gone through this like, okay, this is basically what I expect to be with a Formula One driver where it's busy and hectic and there's lots of people and I'm known by certain crowds, but I can go places and just be myself, to all of a sudden, you not only go through COVID, but then on the other side, now a lot of places around the world, wherever you are, people know who you are. And so not only are you an athlete and you're dealing with the psychological pressures of performing every weekend of the car, but also you're a celebrity, and like there are fandoms online and there are all these pressures about like how you're supposed to act, and like it must be a lot to deal with.
Yeah, and I think Daniel Ricciardo has talked about how like he used to really enjoy visiting LA and the US because there wasn't a huge fandom there. And so he could kind of like get into his own space, and now it's like not that way at all. Um but yeah, I mean, I think it definitely takes you to some interesting places. I don't know. Well, that kind of makes me think about, I think you sent, was it you who sent me something about like the toxicity in the like Ferrari fandom between like
Yeah.
between fans about Carlos and Charles, and like there are people who think they really hate each other. There's people who think that Ferrari completely favors Charles. There's people who think that Ferrari completely favors Carlos, and they all hate each other. And then like I was just like not even looking for it, but I saw some stuff about I just saw some like McLaren stuff about Lando and Daniel, and like the team's completely favoring Lando, and then there's someone else being like the team is completely favoring Daniel, and there's just all this infighting. And I used to kind of feel like Tumblr didn't have a lot of that on it, but I feel like it's gotten more of it. And then there's a lot of people like complaining about it, like why are we doing this?
Yeah, and I'm sure that Twitter is probably ground zero for a lot of that, especially because of like the anonymity of comments on Twitter, and just like the way that the platform is set up, I think opens itself up to that type of infighting in a lot of ways. And it's not just in Formula One, it's everywhere.
And that's a good point. But like it's not just Formula One.
Yeah, I even like, so there's a TV show that I really love called Heartstopper, where
I've heard about this drama.
Yes. So the show is about these two boys in like English equivalent of a high school who meet and fall in love. One's already out as gay. The other realizes as he's falling in love that he's bi. Super sweet, adorable story. The actor who plays the kid on the show who is gay, he was like already out before he got cast on the project. The other actor, the one who plays the kid who's bi, he wasn't publicly out as anything. And there were just recently there's been a just ridiculous amount of toxicity on Twitter in this particular fan base, where there are people who are essentially saying that like this actor should not be playing this character because he's not part of the queer community. And eventually, because of all this toxicity, yesterday he posted a tweet saying that like, I'm bi, you just forced an 18-year-old kid to out himself. What are you doing, basically? And it was so sad that he had like felt this pressure that he had to do it. And I think it's just like kind of the perfect example of like something that's so sweet and innocent in of like the content that it comes from turns into just toxicity on Twitter. That like, I feel so bad for this kid. Like he's an 18-year-old kid, and he like felt like he had no option, where fans were saying that like they started a petition for him to be fired from the show because they were accusing him of queer baiting because he was not publicly,
which is like, you can't queer bait in real life. So
yeah. Anyways.
LOL. But yeah, I mean, like, I think it's also like that toxicity in the like Formula One fandom is so interesting because it's like, they're not characters, they're real people. But they're real people who have like raced each other their whole lives and are generally like fairly friendly with each other. Like, yeah, there's some real like Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton, they have beef. And I think honestly, the more I read about it, the more I'm like, and I think Lewis Hamilton is fine to be like a little unhappy, but they still are like publicly cordial, and you know, like they might talk some smack on the radio, but honestly they're totally professional.
Yeah.
And yeah, Sebastian Vettel
even-
might walk out of an FIA meeting because he's annoyed with Alonso, but again, they're still professional with each other. And so
Yeah.
it's so weird to me to see fans be like just spewing some racist, sexist
Mhm.
vitriol at each other. And you're like, these people seem totally friendly and like hilarious. It makes me think about like, I have no idea. Obviously, like we don't know Wheel, but we also don't know these people's real lives. So this
Yeah.
is all like, speculation. But like to me, I am like the biggest current beef, which obviously is not like really there, is Esteban and Pierre. And they're like there's no fans out there being like, oh, these two, because they're not on the same team right now. But also like, what is there to say? Like,
and going back to the example with Hamilton and Alonso, so Hamilton, he like tweeted a picture of a thumbs up with the like picture of him having just beat Alonso in a race back, I think when they were like teammates in 2007, something like that.
yes.
But he was asked about it in the press conference after the race, and he did not go in on Alonso. He basically kind of laughed about it. It was like, yeah, tweet speaks for herself. And so, yeah, they don't like each other that much.
We need to say the context of the tweet.
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out how to explain the context. Alonso
I think I can do
a comment about how
he thought Max was really deserving because
yes, and more deserving than Hamilton as a winner or something like that, because Hamilton never had real competition or something.
He never had real competition because his car was so good.
Yes, and then that's when
he only had to compete with his teammate.
Yes, and then that's when Lewis put a picture up of a thumbs up with a picture of him having beat Fernando when they were teammates. But at the press conference, like, yeah,
but those two I think were like very toxic together as teammates.
Yeah, I'm sure,
which makes sense. They still obviously don't like each other, but again, they're able to like work in what seems like a tolerable environment for both of them.
Right. And when they're at the racetrack, they're acting like professional adults, and it's mostly a joke when he posts on Twitter like that. And yeah, he wants to make a point, but he's not going to be like an awful person about it.
Yeah. And it's like, I think Alonso seems like the kind of person who doesn't really take jokes about himself that well.
I agree.
But, there's, it doesn't seem toxic. It seems like there's like some back and forth, like elbow ribbing, but like, yeah. But it's very different than what I think a lot of the like fandom stuff can get into, where like there's so much toxicity. Well, yeah, it's wild to me, the inter-team stuff. I'm like, whoa. Yeah. But then between the whole like Mercedes, Max, I'm like, ugh, you guys, they're both so rich. Toxic. It's fine.
Yes. But my real question is, do you think when Mercedes has a winning car that George Russell and Lewis Hamilton are going to become just as toxic as Nico and Lewis or Alonso and Lewis?
I don't know. It'll be so interesting to see, because I feel like Lewis, my impression that he's like putting out into the world right now is that he's like feeling emotionally very well regulated. Like his car has not been doing well. He is losing, and he's kind of keeping it together, which honestly I am like very impressed by. I'm not here for full disclosure. I'm not here for Mercedes dominance. I'm not here for Red Bull dominance. I'm here for Ferrari dominance. Just kidding. That's never going to happen. So it's fine.
Ferrari will Ferrari.
Yeah, we're all going to live. But like, yeah, I'm not here really for either of those teams, but I do feel like, and I could say the same thing for like Max, honestly. I feel like is like kind of growing into himself and seems like much, seems like he has a little bit more of his own ability to regulate himself. So good for him. That's called getting older. I mean, when I was 25, I was a freaking mess.
Yeah. I was a freaking mess who was trying to teach juniors in high school.
Yeah, I was not. No, I think about how young those guys are, and I'm just like,
Right?
wow, how I was, woofda. No,
Crazy.
yeah. So I don't know, but I don't like, I mean, yeah, how much more is there to say about like the toxicity is sad. And
Yeah.
I think if we want to be toxic to anyone, we should be toxic to the FIA. Let's talk about Pierre. Let's get into
Agreed.
Pierre.
Oh my gosh, Pierre. I loved the meme I saw. I don't remember what the picture was exactly, but it basically said Pierre breathes and then FIA penalty. So
Yeah.
God, it's so funny. Which also, he is only at this point now 2 penalty points away from a race ban, which means that if he is at fault for a accident like Daniel did this weekend, he's gonna have a race ban. Which the funniest thing I've seen is that there are some people who are joking that Pierre should like purposefully get those 2 penalty points in the next race, so he's a race ban for Abu Dhabi, so that he can start from scratch with Alpine next year.
Yeah. And I guess I'm not even clear. I do know that it's a cumulative
Yes.
calendar year. So then once you get the race ban, is it like you've paid your debt to society and you start over? Or is it like
I think so,
you're
but I'm
close to
not
back
sure
at the top
about
of the
that.
clock? Because
I'm not sure
I
about
was
that.
listening to the post race show, I think, and they were saying like he can't be getting more penalties until like May. Like he has to be super
Yeah.
careful. And May is a long ways away.
Yeah. So the way that works is that essentially the date when you get a particular penalty point is the date when it expires in the following year.
Mhm.
So the first of the penalty points that he got this year didn't come until May. So he has to make it until then, before any of the points start.
And he got did he get 2 penalty points this weekend?
I think he ended up just getting 1. Daniel got 2.
Okay. Okay, because I was like, that was wild that, I mean, yeah, it was a true racing incident, but also like it was his car locking up and then he went wide. And
Yeah.
Daniel full on just like went into the turn, wasn't fast enough, couldn't like brake in the right point. And like was like he made a conscious choice. It wasn't like his car locked up and he was like, oh no, I'm in the wrong spot.
Yeah, his accident was wild. I couldn't quite believe that he had actually done that. But going back to Pierre, it is crazy how many penalties he's gotten in the last few races, and it does almost feel like the FIA might have something out for him, which is like, how crazy is that? They're supposed to be the impartial judges of what's going on.
Okay,
and
so
all he did was point out what they were doing wrong about having a tractor on track. Of course he's going to be upset about that.
I saw something on Tumblr where they were talking about like, yeah, why does Pierre have so many points? What are they called? Penalty points. And then I was like, I need to look at the comments because I knew it was going to be good. And it was a bunch of people being like, he's the Red Bull scapegoat because the FIA can't really give penalty points to Max and Checo, so they give them to AlphaTauri. There were people saying, you know, what I honestly kind of think, which maybe this is a little tin hatty of me, but I'm like, I feel like it has to do with him really coming for the FIA.
Mm-hmm.
At least a little bit. Like
he was like, by far the most outspoken driver after Singapore.
Oh
which,
yeah.
Like, in my personal opinion, I think he did the right thing speaking out the way he did, and saying the things that he did, because it was a dangerous and scary
unsafe
and just like unacceptable thing to have happened. But it was interesting how I would guess that all of the other drivers agreed with him.
Mm-hmm.
But he was really the only one who is speaking up so forcefully.
Yes. Because the rest of them were just like, it's scary. Even Carlos was like, I think he was like, yeah, it's scary. I don't think it should have been that way. But he wasn't like, he was not doing what Pierre was doing, which was basically like running around being like, this is completely unacceptable, which honestly, I'm with Pierre on this one. I'm like, I would be doing the same thing, especially like, I don't know, that's like traumatic. And like, he's super good friends with Charles. And obviously that was Charles' godfather. Plus his own like best friend passed away in a racing incident. So I just can't imagine like the trauma response. So
I agree.
I'm with Pierre on this one. But wait, let me tell you the favorite thing I saw in the comments.
Can I say one thing first?
Yes.
Which is, I feel like it would be interesting to get inside the head of Charles after this incident of like, was him not speaking out that he was emotionally processing what had just happened? Because I feel like you could see that emotional processing on his face in the post-race interviews. Or was it him like not wanting to speak out as much because he didn't want to upset the FA? I feel like it would be the first. I feel like it's emotional processing, but I don't know.
I think it's probably a little bit of both. Because I do think there's an aspect of self-preservation where you're like, I don't want to be on the bad side of the FIA. And I think the drivers, I think there was a comment like, oh, we're going to talk about this after, I think at the Mexican Grand Prix. The plan was to talk about it in the drivers debrief to like bring to the FIA. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. But my favorite theory that I saw was that Pierre is the one who leaked the Red Bull cast cap documents. And so that's why the FIA is coming after him. And I was like, that's, you know, I love the creativity. No, I mean, like, what if it is? But I don't think it is.
I cannot imagine. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Right? You're like, that's absolutely not what happened.
At the same time, like, he's out. He's free. He's moving on. He doesn't care what happens to Red Bull anymore.
Yeah. So
I saw something that he's gonna have like a new trainer, a new race engineer, like totally fresh start at Alpine.
Well, yeah, because you do normally have to get a new race engineer, don't you?
Do you?
I think you do. Because the race engineer knows a lot about the team like strategy.
Probably.
So you can't be taking your race engineer from like team to team. You got a new one.
But
trainers, you often they'll keep the same trainer, but I think Red Bull provides a lot of trainers for their like junior drivers. And so like a big part of like leaving the team is getting your own trainer. Because I think when Daniel Ricciardo, he was still at Red Bull, but he was kind of like getting more into like his senior years there. That's when he got Michael Italiano. And I only know about Carlos Sainz. I think when he left Toro Rosso, that's when he got his current trainer.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And they just went through like, well, Michael Italiano is just like a personal friend of Daniel's. And Carlos went through like a agency or something. But I think it makes sense. Like Red Bull is very like Ford-esque in that like they're controlling all aspects of the development of the driver.
Yeah.
So when you get out, you want to like figure out, are you better in your own way?
Yeah. I'm excited for Pierre. I think he's going to do awesome at Alpine. I think it's going to be fun to see him in a new environment.
I want to see him in a different car. I want to, although like I think AlphaTauri seems a lot less toxic than Red Bull, to be honest.
Oh yeah, agreed. And I do think he's been having fun at AlphaTauri the past few years.
Yeah, but they're not doing their car is struggling.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about the race a little bit because there's not a lot to say.
Of a Mexican Grand Prix.
Oof, I wasn't going to call it a snooze fest, but I like that you did. Yeah, it was
not that interesting.
Yeah.
I think visually it looks super cool. I think the fans are super fun up in the grandstands. The way the track is laid out, it does not give enough opportunities for overtaking, and overtaking is so hard because of how high the atmosphere, or so how high the elevation is, which makes the atmosphere less dense, which means that I was watching a video, essentially because of that the cars have less downforce, which means it everything overheats very quickly. It's hard to get a lot of traction. It's hard to pass anybody.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it was not a very close race.
no.
It
was also, I would say, a weird experience watching it because the top three were exactly the same and it almost played out exactly the same way as last year. But the only difference was that instead of Max starting from third and leapfrogging the Mercedes at the beginning with Bottas getting crashed out last year, he just led from pole and had enough straight line speed to make it through turn one. And then did the commentators you were watching say, or did you notice that the times were almost exactly the same compared to last year as well?
No, but that's interesting.
Max was approximately 15 seconds ahead, and then Checo is just a couple seconds behind Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah, it was, I don't know.
But that was a weird experience. It almost felt like deja vu.
Yeah.
Except the context for the drivers was so different compared to last year, where last year it was exciting of oh my gosh, Checo might actually have a chance of beating Lewis Hamilton, and Mercedes is actually struggling in this race. Whereas this year, because Checo has done much better this year, it felt frustrating of why can't he not just get that little bit of extra to get past Lewis Hamilton? But at the same time, it was impressive for Mercedes to be where they were compared to where they've been throughout a lot of the season. So it's different context.
I'm really interested to see what happens with Ferrari and Mercedes in the next two races because the Ferraris had nothing this week.
I know.
They were.
Did you hear Charles talking about his race afterwards?
I love that he was just cruising with Carlos.
So good. And I felt like it was a perfect description because they were really just in no man's land. Ended a minute behind Max, but we're 45 seconds up the road from Daniel, who is behind them. Crazy.
Yeah, and I didn't see obviously they weren't on the screen much because there wasn't a ton going on there.
They really weren't.
But I was are they even was the team just hold your positions? Because they didn't seem like they were fighting each other. They were just driving along.
And I don't think either of them had necessarily more pace than the other.
No.
So it's kind of just these are your positions, let's go. And they never really that close to each other to fight each other.
No, they really weren't. I think Carlos had a little bit better pace in the qualifyings than Charles did. Don't tell
a lot of the
the
weekend
Charles
he had a little bit more pace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I made sense that he did a little bit better in that race to me, but
yeah,
at least he finished a race. He's got that going. Yeah. But yeah, I'm is this going to continue into the next two races, or was this a particular issue of Mexico City? Because I did hear the commentators that I was watching say they thought that maybe part of the power unit had been turned down or something in particular, which made sense to me because their free practice one was by far their best, where they were doing their best. And it seemed as the weekend progressed, they were losing speed.
Yes. My assumption is that this is going to be specific to Mexico because of the altitude problem. And I did read that their power units were turned down for sure for qualifying, which played a role in them clearly out qualifying most of the rest of the field, but being clearly behind the top four.
I mean, they were very close with the top four in qualifying. Weren't they? Or was that free practice? Close? I thought it was they were all looking very close, but maybe that was in free practice.
Let me look up.
Yeah, look it up.
The order.
Look it up, man.
The times for qualifying.
Let's be better than Pit Stop Podcast.
You said it, not me.
I did. I'm here for the controversy. We're new anti Pit Stop. Just kidding. We're not. We're fine with them. I'm just making jokes. It's jokes.
My gosh.
We'll come on their podcast if they invite us and we can tell them what it's like to be a woman in America.
Okay. So let's see here. Times for qualifying in Q3. Max Verstappen, 117.7. George Russell, 118. Lewis Hamilton, 118. They were just a 100th apart from each other. Yeah, they were super ridiculously close. Okay. Sergio Perez, 118.12. Carlos Sainz, 118.35.
Okay, so he's
Now,
off a little bit, but it's still
yeah,
like
off a little bit.
he's off a little bit, but not a ton. But yeah,
No.
the Ferraris were not, they didn't have it. It felt like
Yeah.
Ferrari's strategy call was to basically be like, get fifth and sixth.
Let's save our engines, make it to the end of the race.
Which I saw a rumor that Carlos is gonna get a new engine in
Brazil. I saw that
Brazil.
too.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? Is he gonna go to the back of the grid again? Because he's already taken grid penalties for a new engine.
Yeah. Which what I saw did not specify if it like is all new parts or if it's just the ICE or just like the MCU is another thing that could be replaced quite often. Because if it's just the ICE, I think it's 5, if I remember correctly. And if it's the ICE and the MCU, I think that's 10. But then if it's like everything, it's 20 or back of the grid, depending on how it's. I don't know what it's going to be.
Is an interesting choice in the context of like there are 2 races left, but
I know
he's really like Carlos has really dropped out of the like competition as a driver
in the drivers' championship.
Yeah,
which is surprising because it feels
well,
like
2 DNFs in a row.
Yeah, I know. It feels like his driving has been consistent, but then he's had these. He has what 6 DNFs over the course of the season.
Yeah,
which is a lot.
So I honestly feel like being in 6 with 6 DNFs is not bad. And yeah, we'll see. I'm interested to see what happens to him next year because I want to know if he's going to. I do have to say, like, he didn't do super great when he was at Toro Rosso. And but yeah, I think he's always, to me, seemed like a very consistent driver. So I wonder if he comes back next year more consistent than ever. And this is like his year of like chaos. Because I do think most drivers, here's a theory, hot Grace theory.
Let's hear it.
Most really good drivers need 1 year of chaos. It's like you're playing with the limits.
Okay.
I think it's true.
Can you give me an example of this? Like Max Verstappen in 2017 or 18?
Yeah. And even like Michael Schumacher was playing with the limits a lot there and then kind of like found his groove. And then there's the whole like Ferrari saga where he's like really figuring out the team, mapping it out.
That is an interesting theory. I don't know.
I mean, most drivers have like their years of just like
inconsistency.
Yeah. And then they get right back to it. I loved, like, I saw I don't remember which commentator was saying this, but like that Carlos has qualified in like the 8 years that he's been doing the Mexican Grand Prix. Each year he's qualified 1 place ahead of the last year.
That's hilarious.
You gotta love it. No, okay. But also I was loving all the like memes about George Russell taking out Max Verstappen. Not that I want that to happen. And obviously it didn't,
so
but it was quite funny.
So good.
And I liked, and then, I did think it was a little bit funny when everyone was like, no one has won from the front in 4 years. And it was like, yeah, because the altitude affects the ability to have good race pace. So, but we know the Mercedes is like consistent on the race pace, or not the Mercedes, the Red Bull.
The Red Bull. Yeah.
I'm like, and hasn't Max won it like a bunch of years? So like,
he's won it at least 3 times.
Like he's not gonna win it because he's on the front. And it was like, well, he's won it from behind all the other times. So I think
I will say my Checo fangirl heart was kind of hoping that George Russell might take out Lewis and Max and Checo could just sweep through to a win.
It would have been a much more interesting race. Okay, and then also I saw some stuff about, like, I've seen some Yuki fangirls out there who are really mad that people were like loving on Daniel so much. And I was like, I hear it. Like, they were like, it's not like George got driver of the day in Austin. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that Daniel took out Yuki, and he did, let's be honest. Like,
yes.
it is what it is. But I'm also like, George did not have a spectacular drive after he took out Carlos. He just drove. That's so mean. He's, high level. He's killing the game, but he didn't do anything special. Whereas we got to see Daniel like finally really come into his own for the first time, essentially all season. So of course people want to vote for him for driver of the day.
Yes.
Not for taking out Yuki, but for like
everything that came after.
driving aggressively and like maximizing his car. That's what we want to see.
Yeah, I feel like one of the frustrating things as a fan of Formula One is how the penalties can almost feel so insignificant sometimes. Whereas, like, I remember feeling very frustrated when Lewis and Max collided at Silverstone last year. And Max is out of the race in the hospital after like a bad accident, and Lewis gets a 10-second penalty and then wins the race, and it's like no problem. It can feel frustrating. It almost feels like there needs to be more consequences for drivers that cause big major accidents besides just like 10 seconds in the race. And I do think like drivers getting grid place penalties for upcoming races, I almost think it's a better penalty in a way, because I think it can make more of an impact on their drive. But I don't know. There's no good solution. You're not going to kick a driver out of a race because they have a bad accident like Daniel did.
Yeah, and that's honestly, I do think there needs to be room like for saying like, obviously there's a big difference between like causing an accident that you probably should have prevented versus like negligence or like intentionally enacting harm. And so I think that there's room to be like, yeah, it's a bummer that George got a 5-second penalty and Carlos is out of the race. But ultimately, like, George didn't want to get into an incident either. Yeah. He just wasn't able to drive as defensively as like he ought to have been. So I don't think it should ruin his whole race, like I'm like,
I think there's no good solution, but I think what's frustrating is that it can feel like
when your favorite driver is knocked out of the race and the other guy is like fine, and you're like,
right,
he's gonna get 30, he's gonna get all those points.
Yeah, the 10-second, 5-second penalties don't end up impacting anything in the race. That's where it's like, why are we even doing this?
But I think there's also room, like with the Daniel stuff, I'm like, he took the 10-second penalty and then he like made something of it and was like, I'm gonna pull away with such dominance that the 10-second penalty won't even matter. That's good for him.
Yeah, no, his drive after his crash with Yuki was awesome. It was really fun to watch.
Literally, what changed? And tell me what changed.
I have no idea. I think it was a combination of him thinking I have nothing to lose here, and
what has he had to lose before?
I don't know. But also, I mean, the soft tires at the end of the race where everybody's just trying to like manage their tires to the end, and he's like, I'm going.
I thought Mercedes' tire strategy was bad.
I spent the majority of the race until there was like 15 laps left thinking that Red Bull had made a big mistake on their tire strategy, because I was like, well, are they going to bring them in, and are they going to have to then try and pass on track to get their positions back? And they're like, oh no, they're just going.
Yeah.
I was the strategy play out.
I was with you as well, where I was like, okay, what's going to happen here? But then you got to the end and you were like, oh, Mercedes actually made the big, but it was, at least for hearing the radios that I heard, it seemed like Red Bull wasn't sure about their strategy either. It was only after they had Max come in and then took a look at his tires that they were like, oh, your aggregation was fine, actually. Yeah. Like, and you can really drive these.
Yeah, they were also really lucky that they saw Daniel go 45 laps on mediums before he switched to softs. And so they're like, oh, He was fine. His tires were fine. His speed only dropped off in the last couple laps. We can probably
do
do
it.
this. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
was interesting too.
interesting.
I think if Mercedes had made a better call with the tire strategy, it would have been a much more interesting race.
Agreed.
Because it wasn't, I don't know. Also, like, let's just talk quick here about George Russell, who I used to find very endearing. I was thinking about our little pod where we talked about drivers, and I didn't pick, I think I said he was posh, but actually the way I usually describe him is like very Christopher Robin-esque.
Okay.
Like, he's got a real Christopher Robin energy to me. But the more PR time he gets, the more he talks, the more I'm like, you're digging a hole, bro. Like, he's not, I don't know. Yeah. It's
Can you give
not,
me an
it's
example
interesting.
of this?
Oh, there was something recently where he was talking about like how he went over and like apologized to Carlos after Coda. And he was like, when you're on, and I think this is, I'm like, I don't think he's wrong in the truth of this, but he said something along the lines of like, when you're the driver, because on the radio, he was like, Carlos totally took me out. And he was like, as a driver, you always are going to defend yourself until the penalty comes back, because
yeah, I heard that.
You're fighting for yourself. Which totally true. I'm not going to disagree with that. But I'm like, don't say it out loud, bro. Like, it makes people not like you. I think he's like really leaning into that like posh boy side of things. And he was much more, and this is maybe a me thing, but just talking about like likability, which doesn't matter at all, but it's just interesting to me. So much more likable in Williams, where he's just doing his best every day and has a horrible car. And it's just, you know, you can see him just like, how did I get stuck here?
At the same time, I feel like I remember when he was at Williams being annoyed because I kept feeling like, why is everybody saying that he's so good? Why is everybody assuming he's going to Mercedes? Why is he Mercedes golden boy when he's just tooling around at the back with Williams? Because I didn't follow Formula One stuff enough to realize how well he had done in like Formula 3 and Formula 2.
But it does
And
beg the
now,
question, like,
I get that. It makes sense.
well, it's like, you know, there are people out there being like, Carlos should watch his back because Mick Schumacher's coming for his Ferrari seat. And I'm like, no, he's not. No, babes.
No.
But that's what it, and that's where obviously I think our ignorance is showing, because I remember the same feeling where I was like, I don't really understand what he's doing differently on the racetrack, but he must be doing something, but he's getting no points. But I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
And obviously like Williams has changed the car, but like it seems like Alex Albon is getting a lot more out of that. Like, you know, you look at Alex and you look at Latifi and you're like, Alex is really maximizing that car.
Yeah. I do think that's a significantly due to the new regulations, and like it's a totally different car, and the way that the grid is laying out this year is much different compared to last year. But it is interesting where like everybody talked about how good George Russell was when he was up against Robert Kubica and then Nicholas Latifi. And nothing like personal against either of them, but they are not the strongest race drivers on the grid. And that's the only people that George Russell was being compared to, because those were the only people that were in any sort of machinery that was similar where they could be compared to him. So interesting.
Yeah. It's super interesting.
We also must just not like posh English guys, apparently, because we both are not a fan of I feel like George Russell can almost sometimes have some arrogance to how he says things. And then the same thing with Lando, the other posh English boy.
Yeah, Lando, I don't dislike him. I think he's like grown on me a little bit, but I still am like, okay. He maybe is actually like a very fun person in real life. Like I can see,
Yeah.
like I enjoy someone who's just like, he seems like a person who's like interested in many things and like enjoys more than just racing. And
Yeah. Maybe he's a little too Gen Z for me. He's
your
very
Gen
Gen
Z
Z.
hate, and you
I don't
really
hate
are.
Gen Z. I live with and work with Gen Z. That's my life. But
I'm a
I don't know.
Gilzennial. That's a thing.
Wait, you're just any?
No, I'm not. That's a joke.
You're the opposite.
Don't say that.
No, wait, no.
I'm a
You're right in the middle of
Gilzennial.
millennials. You're right in the middle of millennials.
Yeah, thank you. But there, yeah, I think that I have more sympathy for the Gen Zers than you do. But yeah, like Lando, I don't know. Don't get it. Seems like a nice kid. I'm sure he's fun. Actually, I think
Yeah.
that's probably the thing that I enjoy, like seeing the social media PR stuff that comes out about him, is like he does seem really fun.
Yeah.
But good for him. Lovely.
Yeah.
I worry about the education he's received. No.
I will say it has been really fun to see. It seems like in the last couple weeks, him and Daniel have like finally become really good friends, and it's very sweet. So that's been fun.
Yeah. Recently I saw an interview with Daniel Ricciardo, and I don't know what it was in, but where he was talking about his experience at McLaren, and just saying that like he didn't I don't know exactly what he said. Did you read this?
Yeah, I did. The one where he was talking about like seeing a therapist and how he just got to a point where like his frustrations in racing felt like his almost seeping into every aspect of his life, where it was hard for him to get distance, and him not wanting to like go out and enjoy the rest of his life and spend time with friends because of how much he was struggling. And it was hard to read.
Well, I thought the part that kind of interests me more was honestly about, he was talking about how hard it was to not have the momentum with the car, and to have a car that's just like not on the pace. Yeah. And that he didn't realize that that was going to be such a struggle for him. And it sounds like it almost sounded like he was admitting that it was like mental as well. And that like he's not really interested in racing unless he can be really competitive. And that's why he doesn't want to go to any of the other teams.
Interesting.
And I was like, actually, after reading that, I thought that's fair. That's a fair point to make, because from an outside perspective, like my perception is like, you want to race, get a car. But you know, good on him for doing the work and understanding himself and knowing that he's going to be really unhappy if he's not in a really competitive car.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah. And I know that from an outside perspective, it can seem like, oh, we have 3 months in between when a racing season ends and when the next one starts, and that should be enough time to like reset yourself and be ready to go. But when you're actually in the situation, it's not necessarily going to feel like that. And I also think it's not, for the drivers and for the people who work at the team, the 3 months between when the season ends in Abu Dhabi and when it starts up again is not just like they're at home doing nothing. They're working a lot behind the scenes, doing stuff that we don't see. And I'm sure it's not nearly as much of a break as we think of it as. Or like, I know last year I had the most challenging year I've ever had at school. And by the time I got to summer break, it was so needed. And I gave myself the time to just like not do anything for school and not do anything for a little while and let my body rest and recharge. But I had 3 months where I didn't have school responsibilities. Drivers don't get that. They do have other responsibilities that they have to keep doing with the team. And so I get that like an actual year-long break without having the responsibilities that a Formula One driver has would be very different than just switching teams and trying to start again.
Yeah, I just listened to Alex Albon's Behind the Grid. That's only F1
Mhm.
podcast that I'm frequenting right now. And it was so good. And he talked about being a test driver for Red Bull. And he said it was the hardest he's ever worked in Formula One. Like he
I'm
was
trying to
like,
remember if I've listened to this episode. I
oh,
love
it's
Alex.
so
If I
good.
haven't listened to it, I should.
Yeah, go listen to it. And it totally made me, there's that meme that was going around about Alex. It's like a classroom and all the drivers are sitting in it. And Alex is at the front and it's on tire, and it, like the chalkboard says tire management. And then there's a picture of Checo dressed up as Jesus in the corner. And Carlos is like up front touching a wheel or something, and like the rest of the drivers are like sitting in the class, and there's someone outside on the window or something.
I did not look at it that closely. I'm gonna pull it up
so
again
good,
because
but I have
I'm
been like,
gonna enjoy this.
I remember initially seeing it and being like, I don't really know what Alex Albon's doing with tire management. That's so incredible.
Australia,
and then
baby.
I listened to that episode and I listened and heard him talk about Australia, but even just hearing him talk about being a test and reserve driver and how much it improved his driving and how much he felt like it helped him to see that there was this extra like little bit that he could tap into, that I was like, that's really rad. It made me and almost like going back to Daniel a little bit, made me be like, I can see how maybe for him he's like, maybe that is a place where I can like find part of myself as a driver, getting into test driving and like really banging out that car.
Yeah. I don't know. I hope he's happy with what he decides to do next year.
He's definitely going to Merc, right? Like we're all seeing that. He's going to Mercedes.
I mean, they're all wearing the merch now. It has to be.
It seems like he is. I don't really know much about the drivability of the Mercedes, but my guess is that it's very well balanced. What do you think?
I know that a porpoise is a lot. That's about it.
Outside of that, but like as far as like understeer, oversteer.
Yeah, I don't know. I do not know. I cannot find this picture.
I just sent it to you.
Oh, you sent it again?
Recently. Let's see if I can find it.
Well, our group text is a little ridiculous.
Too big. Let me see.
We may or may not have a group
where we share all the memes.
Which is called F1 Girlies, and it's amazing.
It's pretty great.
Sarah must think we're insane because she just watches all of this go down.
She's like, no comment. No comment.
I've actually talked to her about this and asked if she like would want to not be on it.
I thought she was going to take herself out.
I know, but she said she actually enjoys watching.
Oh, I sent it directly to you. It's literally the last picture I sent to you. Oh, Lance Stroll is looking in from outside the window. I knew there was something silly going on here.
Oh, there's Checo as Jesus.
Yeah. You gotta really look at this. Valtteri Bottas is front and center, sitting down. What does it say on Lewis's shirt? There's like their stickers tapped onto the back of Lewis's shirt.
I can't read the stickers.
I think one says "kick me." It's good.
My
It's all over good.
So good. Really, the Checo as Jesus in the corner just sets it over the top.
And Lance Stroll looking in from outside the window. He looks so like he looks so upset. Oh yeah, okay. Okay. Are there more things that you wanted to make sure we talked about today?
Not that I can think of. I did want to ask, did you I sent a link to a like Tumblr site where it has a like pick the drivers and we'll tell you like who you like as a driver. Did you do that?
No, I couldn't figure out how to do it because it seemed like you had to do it on a desktop. And I was like,
oh, yeah, what? I was on my computer. I did it on desktop. You should do it. And we can compare notes next week. And since we don't have a race.
I love that. Okay.
Awesome.
But I think my biggest complaint, because I watched this race at a friend's house, and so I was watching on their television, and it was the international commentary, and I was like, I don't like these guys, to be honest with you. I'm not fans. I just didn't enjoy it. I've made a decision. Not here for it.
I was at mom and dad's, and I was operating under the understanding that it was going to be broadcast on ABC because it's in the right time zone. And then I looked it up the day before, and ABC was instead airing soccer. So I stayed there because I was like, I want to watch the race with mom and dad. And so I was like, okay, I'll get the F1 TV app on my phone. I can like cast that to their TV. I could not figure out how to get either my phone or my computer to cast to their TV. And we ended up just watching on my computer, and it was very sad.
Oh,
it was a
well,
bummer.
So yeah, I watched at a friend's house, and I had to watch the international commentary, and I just wasn't enjoying it. And then I was like, maybe I'm uncultured swine because I'm not enjoying this, but just like a little bit, it just felt like they were a little like, this is how it is, and you can tell who they like, and I wasn't really enjoying that.
Is it international commentary? Is that the like
it's like Crofty
Sky Sports, the like British,
it's Sky Sports
version. Yeah
I'm not here for the British
we should talk about this. Those were the people that Max decided not to talk to in the media pen this week. Or like, not even,
and they were like, he doesn't have time for us. And he's
no,
like,
he specifically said, I'm not talking to you because, in his words,
but
one particular commentator who has been consistently
he really has though. I'm not even a Max fan, and I have to say, like, Max is right. I have to close my blinds. Too bright. But yeah. But on broadcast, he was like, he doesn't have time for us. He's late to something. And I was like, that's
all he said?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Wow.
But what did that make me think of? Something. I don't like those guys. They're pretty obvious. Oh, because they keep saying that like Max can't win. Ted, I think his name is Ted. He said like, oh, Max can't win without something, like basically can't win without help. So like he's saying that like the whole end under safety car, that was help for Max. And he's saying that Red Bull breaching the cost cap was help for Max. And it's just like,
why is that about Max instead of about how Red Bull is operating as a team when it comes to the cost cap?
Girl, I'm just telling you what the commentator is saying. So don't turn into the international version because you're not going to enjoy it. Yeah, it just is not for me. Yeah. But I did watch the whole race that way, and then I was kind of like grumpy about it.
Well, you can come back to F1 TV and the Will Buxton crew.
Yeah.
Always fun.
Oh my gosh. Which I'm not saying Will Buxton's any better. Get rid of that guy too. I'm just kidding. It's all fine. It's just like, it is interesting how much like the race, the way you perceive the race can be determined by who's commenting on the race. Because yeah, I was like, this race is really boring. But then when I talked to Jamie, she was like, oh, it was way better on F1 TV. And I was like, oh, dang it.
I did not find it that particularly interesting on F1 TV.
Well, I watched the radio recap as my way to kind of like see the other side. And I thought that was good.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, wasn't the most exciting race. There was something I was thinking. Oh, I know what I was thinking of. Okay. I think that they did this on the American broadcast and the Sky Sports broadcast, but they were really coming for the drivers' radios. Like Max was on the radio being like, my left front is all like lost its grip or whatever. And they were like, there's no point in saying that. They were very like, that's not what your crew needs to hear. Maybe that wasn't what it was in regards to, but like, and then they cut to like Lance Stroll being like, there's no grip. There's nothing.
Oh yeah, they did do that.
Like, yeah. There's no point to what he's saying. Why is he even saying that? That's not what your engineer needs to hear. And I don't know. I'm like, tune me in because it's funny, but just let them, you don't need to come for them for how they're
Agreed.
discussing things on radio. Just let them discuss.
And the drivers have enough things that they're worrying about instead of being nice to the team on the radio.
I mean, I think you should be nice to the team,
Yes.
but
Like,
I
you don't need
do-
to yell and swear like Yuki all the time.
I love when the drivers are like, don't talk. What was I swear I just heard like a driver's radio from Esteban, I think, when it was in the race, when they're talking about like Daniel's coming up on him and he's like, stop talking. Like, we're in it now, bud.
Well, should we meet up next week to compare what we think of the different drivers?
Yeah. Let's get together, do a little check-in since we don't have a race next week.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us on We Don't Know We All Have Fun. That's a Mexican Grand Prix review.
We'll see you next week just to talk. All right.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.